Well, I've seen some bonehead moves in my time, but this is probably one of the worst ones. Daniel Warren Johnson posted a commissioned sketch, we'll call it, on social media depicting absolute Batman choking out an ICE agent. Now, I'm sure that image was meant to ruffle a few feathers, but here's the big problem. If DC doesn't address this image, Daniel Warren Johnson may have just opened them up to a lawsuit. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe and like buttons down below. It helps the channel grow, and we'd very much appreciate it. So what's the problem? About a month ago, the writer of Red Hood #1, Gretchen felker-martin, put out some inflammatory social media posts that essentially got her fired and had the entire book scrapped. Almost exactly 1 month later, Daniel Warren Johnson puts out an inflammatory social media post about Absolute Batman, and so far, after about 2 days, DC has remained completely silent. Now, according to DC's stated policy on social media usage by its creators, they have a zero tolerance policy for anything promoting hostility or violence inconsistent with DC standards of conduct. So the question remains, why was one creator instantly fired for words while another is currently enjoying complete silence after posting a depiction of, I would say, graphic violence towards law enforcement? Let's lay out the two scenarios. Starting with scenario number 1, we have Gretchen felker-martin and Red Hood Under the Hood #1. Martin was hired for the new Red Hood series, and to be frank, Martin also had a very extreme reputation as a transgressive horror author. You could make the case that's why Martin was hired for the job. Martin has very little experience writing superhero comics, almost no portfolio to speak of. So they were looking for somebody with attitude, not necessarily a good fit for the material, but okay, the hiring was made. Why? You can speculate on your own, especially when you look at the editors who hired her. On the day of her book's release, Martin made some very controversial social media comments mocking the murder of a conservative activist named Charlie Kirk, making statements like, "I hope the bullet's okay," as an example. This got everybody in an uproar, but here's where most people kind of get it wrong. That's not the only post Martin put out that day. Prior to the assassination, prior to putting out the posts that are essentially celebrating Kirk's death, Martin put out a tweet talking about the comic itself. And within the comic, there is a scene where a bunch of cops are mind control forced to put guns in their mouths to commit suicide. When people were grumbling about that, Martin took to social media and said, "Oh, it's okay, it's not a problem. Cops aren't people anyway, so if they die, it's no big loss." Essentially, effectively denigrating an entire classification of people who are working in law enforcement. Essentially, Martin was using the platform of the DC comic to fantasize about hurting police. Now, of the two, one definitely got a lot more press, but the first one, talking about cops, probably is the one that was more likely to get her fired because it was essentially advocating violence against police officers, which in DC's case is a big no-no. DC immediately canceled the entire series run and terminated the creator's contract. They cited their zero tolerance policy. You cannot promote hostility or violence, right? Keep that phrase in mind. You cannot promote hostility or violence. Now, the irony of that is within the comic, they have the scene that is essentially promoting hostility and violence towards police. But DC chose to take action in accordance with their policy, and Martin was fired for the words she put online. Not the violence in her work, but for the violence she's advocating for in real life. Before we get to the second scenario and what happened this weekend, I want to ask you a quick question and I want to get your thoughts on this. Speaking specifically about the Red Hood scenario, do you think Gretchen felker-martin deserved to be fired? Do you think the book deserved to be canceled and pulled off the shelves? Some people feel it was okay. Some people feel it was like a First Amendment free speech overreach. Give me your thoughts down in the comments below. I want to hear your opinion about that. So that brings us to scenario number 2 and what happened this weekend. This weekend is New York City Comic-Con 2025. This is the big event where DC is sitting down and they're laying out all their scenarios of books that are coming up, new series, what events are changing, who's going where, what creators are coming on, which creators are coming off. You get it. It's the big event where everybody's trying to push out what DC is doing that wants to get people excited for comics again. So what happens? Somebody commissions, apparently, as best as we can tell, Daniel Warren Johnson, who is a known creator, both writer and artist, who I personally like. I like what he did on Murder Falcon. I love what he did on Transformers. He's not on the book anymore. I love what he did with Beta Ray Bill. I like Daniel Warren Johnson, so this is not meant to be a hit piece, but it has to call out what appears to be an inconsistency. He's asked to do a commission sketch, and in that commission sketch, you see Absolute Batman basically choke-locking an ICE agent. Clearly shows on the chest of the person that he has in his grip, ICE agent. So essentially they're capitalizing on the idea that ICE agents are currently in the political zeitgeist for going into cities, finding illegal aliens, capturing them, deporting them. So there's a dichotomy there of Batman, who's all about justice and law enforcement, choking out somebody who's also for justice and law enforcement. But be that as it may. Well, you could say, well, it's his private thing. He's just doing a sketch. However, he didn't just keep it to himself. He didn't give it to the person whoever commissioned it. He decided to post it online with a little bat symbol, essentially advertising his love for the work that he just did, which shows Absolute Batman choking out an ICE agent. And you might say, wait a minute, pause. Just pause for a second. Daniel Warren Johnson is not on Absolute Batman. He doesn't write it. He doesn't draw it. That's Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta. So what's the problem here? An artist can do a freeform sketch if they want to for a property they're not connected with. Who cares? The problem is he is connected to Absolute Batman. In about 2 weeks, a little bit more, Absolute Batman Annual #1 comes out. And Daniel Warren Johnson is the lead writer, or at least one of the lead writers on that book. So essentially, he is an Absolute Batman creator for a book that's coming out in about 2 weeks, or 2.5 weeks at this time. So that presents a problem. Now he is putting out a commission work where it shows an established DC character, depicting that character using violence. I'm using DC's words here, promoting hostility and violence toward real-world people. Remember, as far as we know, there's no ICE agents in the absolute Gotham City. That's never come up. That's never been shown. So he created it specifically for this purpose. DC has a zero-tolerance policy against promoting hostility or violence towards people outside in the world, not within the book. We saw that with the Gretchen felker-martin example. And now we have here Daniel Warren Johnson, not a month later, doing, not using words, but using art, pretty much the exact same thing. But in Martin's case, DC acted almost within 24 hours to scrap the whole thing. In Daniel Warren Johnson's case, DC has so far remained silent. So that's the second scenario. Let's compare the two scenarios and see if is it really apples for apples, or is it too far apart to really make a comparison. Okay, so here's a side by side, and we're just going to go point by point and see if there's something there, or maybe not so much, and I think you're going to see it's the former, not the latter. Gretchen felker-martin mocked a murder victim and mocked the death of police. One happened in the real world, one happened within the pages of the book. Daniel Warren Johnson depicted a DC hero violently attacking a law enforcement individual that is part of the real world because ICE agents, as far as we know, don't exist in the book. Now, technically, Martin's words qualified as promoting hostility because she reveled in the death of a human being, but she also reveled in the death of individuals within her own comic. Daniel Warren Johnson's art depicted a clear act of physical violence using a DC character, a prominent DC character, meant to depict violence against people in the real world. Violence against law enforcement is a sensitive political topic right now, and on that count, they're both pretty similar. Now, the question is, why did DC act quickly in one scenario with Red Hood and Gretchen felker-martin, but not in this scenario because it's now several days later and nobody's said a peep? It probably boils down to, potentially from a corporate point of view, creator value. Daniel Warren Johnson is a bigger, more established name than Gretchen felker-martin. I don't think anybody would argue with that. He's more acclaimed. He's done much better stuff. He won the Eisner for Transformers. He is a known quantity and he does excellent work. He has a lot of fans. Gretchen felker-martin, on the other hand, almost none, at least not within the superhero comic sphere. Now, DC says they have a zero-tolerance policy about promoting hate or violence. They don't say hate or violence in the real world. They don't say hate or violence within the pages of their comic unless it's part of the narrative story. They say promoting hate or violence. In both cases, both creators are promoting hate and violence towards individuals who are in the real world. In Martin's case, it's a mix of the two, promoting hate and violence towards cops because she expressed a viewpoint that cops don't count as people, and she also reveled in the death of a commentator and speaker. In Daniel Warren Johnson's case, he's now saying it's acceptable to promote violence against real world people who are, in this case, police officers or who are ICE agents, which are technically federal officers. So if we look at the policy as DC has laid it out, and we look at the scenario for both creators, effectively, they're doing the same thing. But if we speculate as to why they acted quickly in one case and why they didn't act quickly in the other case, it's probably because of name recognition, brand recognition, and honestly, it probably boils down to money. Now, DC may act more quickly in Johnson's case once they kind of get wind and get all together. But honestly, half of DC staff is right now at New York City Comic-Con. It's not like they don't know. It's not like they're not talking to each other. But unfortunately, their lack of action, at least in the same level of speed and urgency that they did in Martin's case, now presents a problem. And this is where we get to the potential of a lawsuit. Now, there are several ways that this can play out. I mean, the time frame reaction is pretty much a set deal, so there's nothing DC can do about it right now. They can't go back in time and rewind the clock and say, oh, you got to deal with this right now. They've already let it go too long. But there are a couple strategies, and depending on which one they choose, could determine the fate of how this whole mess plays out. The first strategy is the let it die strategy. DC may choose to continue to remain silent, hoping the news cycle just moves on quickly. If they do this, the double standard will be de facto official, making future dismissals for anybody who is a work-for-hire contractor based on the policy highly difficult to defend. Okay, and that would be a big problem because you're going to say you have a zero-tolerance policy, but you selectively enforce it. That is going to be trouble no matter how you look at it. Then you have the second scenario. We'll call it the soft correction. DC might issue a vague statement without naming Daniel Warren Johnson directly, re-emphasizing the guidelines while promoting Absolute Batman Annual #1. It's a transparent attempt to control the narrative without punishing a star. We can say, well, we're giving him a slap on the wrist. We're telling him to do something about that or not do it again. And maybe Johnson retracts the post. Maybe he just says, oopsie, I'm leaving it up, but I'll never do it again. Very much a mea culpa type of scenario. The major consequence of what's happened now is the inconsistency for new talent. Gretchen Felker-Martin's firing set a low, rigid bar for words. The Daniel Warren Johnson scenario and silence sets a high, flexible bar for art and established creators who are popular, which means they bring in money. DC has effectively signaled that only expendable creators are subject to rigid enforcement. Now, the fate of whether or not DC will do anything about this with respect to Daniel Warren Johnson and the annual that's coming up will serve as the final proof of whether DC's social media policy is a genuine moral guideline or merely a tool for risk management applied inconsistently when they choose to. Now, here's where the legal part comes in and the lawsuit potential is increasing, which makes things very sticky. Gretchen Felker-Martin does not have grounds for a civil lawsuit strictly based upon her firing. And she can't claim a lawsuit simply because Daniel Warren Johnson got different treatment for her on its face. So that in and of itself is not enough for a lawsuit. However, the difference in treatment gives powerful evidence to support a pre-existing grounds for a lawsuit. Here's why. Most comic book writers and artists are independent contractors. They're not employees. So when we talk about the phrases like wrongful termination, that really only applies to at-will employees. Employees benefit from broader state and federal protections, so that makes sense. Contractors are almost entirely governed by the terms in their contract. Her ability to sue depends entirely on the language in that contract regarding cancellation and termination. If Martin sues, her strongest argument would be that DC breached the contract by canceling Red Hood and potentially any unannounced horror comic work she may have been working on without adequate cause, as defined in the contract. DC claimed her termination was for cause because she violated the policy against promoting hostility and violence. Martin would argue that this cause was pretextual, or that the punishment was disproportionate to the offense, which breaches the contract's good faith provision. She would seek damages for the lost income from Red Hood and any subsequent work that came out of it, based on the principle that the contract was terminated without meeting the stated legal threshold. Now here's where Daniel Warren Johnson's actions this past weekend now bolster the idea of that lawsuit. The fact that DC failed to take action against Johnson would not be the basis, but it would be a compelling piece of evidence in her favor during a trial hearing. In Martin's case, she was fired and the book was canceled. In Johnson's case, no action was taken. In Martin's case, she used words mocking violence and death towards people in real life. In Johnson's case, he's showing art that's depicting violence towards people in real life. DC claimed this was promoting hostility in Martin's case. The depiction is objectively, in Johnson's case, depicting hostility towards a specific group of people, in this case, law enforcement. The conclusion here would be that Martin's legal team would use Johnson's case to show that promoting hostility or violence is selectively enforced, meaning it's not enforced consistently or neutrally based on the content, but rather on how good the creator is. Are they bringing in money? Are they high profile? Are they acclaimed? Whatever the case may be. This difference in their profiles proves that the reason DC gave for firing Martin, which is violating the policy, was not the real reason, thereby demonstrating pretext and supporting the breach of contract claim. In other words, Johnson's ability to post this picture of Absolute Batman choking out an ice agent and DC not acting on it at all shows that DC only enforces the policy when they feel it's in their best interest, which means they were probably either looking for a reason to fire Martin before actually firing her and they used the post as an excuse, or they had some bias towards her. Now, Gretchen felker-martin is a trans woman, so you might even argue in an extreme scenario that maybe DC has something against trans creators and they were just looking for an excuse to get rid of her. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you can see how that case would play out. And Johnson not being a trans man, he's a straight white male as far as we know, that really kind of puts a ugly spin on this scenario. So Martin, as each day goes by and DC refuses to act on Johnson, Martin now has more ammunition to potentially level a lawsuit saying, you only fired me because A, not Daniel Warren Johnson, and B, you were looking for a reason to fire me and you just used the policy as an excuse because you don't enforce it evenly. And boy, oh boy, the discovery on that trial is going to be ugly. And there you have it. You have two creators. One, DC shut down faster than you can say, how do you do? The other one, they just let him go on and do whatever they wanted to do. Martin was shown the door. Johnson is left to go on his merry way. DC is now in a difficult spot, and they have to do something about it. If they do nothing, that just makes it worse all the way around. So, if you thought this video was educational and helpful, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, hit that subscribe button. That helps us grow. That helps the YouTube algorithms know that we're trying to build the channel, and your help is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for joining. Now go read comics, but read wisely. I'll see you next time for more comical opinions.